When you sit down for a meal, have you ever really thought about where your food comes from? I don't mean the grocery store. I mean its deep, deep evolutionary history. Turns out the food on our plates is the result of an incredible partnership between humans and plants that's been going on for 10,000 years. Okay, let's just jump right in with a wild thought. Picture a big, sweet ear of corn. The kind you'd get at a summer barbecue. Now, what if I told you that its ancient ancestor was basically just a scraggly weed with a few kernels so tiny and hard you could barely even eat them? Well, it's not a hypothetical. It absolutely was. That wild plant is called teosinte. And the story of how we got from that to the corn we know and love today, well, that's the incredible 10,000-year journey we're going to explore. So here's our roadmap. We're going to start with how we went from just gathering wild plants to actually farming them. Then we'll dive into something called the domestication syndrome. After that, we'll see how these crops traveled the globe and changed. Then we get to the sciencey part, decoding their genetic secrets. And finally, we'll look at what's next for the future of our food. Okay, let's start at the very beginning. We've got to wind the clock way, way back, about 10,000 years ago. The last ice age is ending, and our ancestors are figuring out a completely new way to get dinner on the table. And what's so fascinating is that agriculture wasn't some single light bulb moment that happened in one place. It was a global revolution. Around 10,000 years ago, you had the first farmers in the Fertile Crescent working with wild wheat and barley. 1,000 years later, halfway across the world in Mesoamerica, people started domesticating teosinte into maize. And over in Asia, rice cultivation began. It was happening independently all over the planet. So as our ancestors began to farm, they started to notice that some plants were just, well, they were better. Easier to gather, they tasted better, they were more reliable. And this led them, probably without even realizing it at first, to select for a very specific set of traits. Scientists today have a name for this: the domestication syndrome. So what in the world is this syndrome? It's really just a simple checklist of all the traits that separate a wild plant from its domesticated cousin. It's the direct result of generations upon generations of farmers picking the seeds from their very best plants to grow next season. And these changes were total game changers. Think about it. Wild plants often sprawl out on the ground, but we chose the ones that grew upright and compact because they're way easier to manage. Wild seeds can just sit in the soil for years, which is no good if you're a farmer, so we selected for seeds that sprouted reliably. But maybe the most important change was this. Wild grains shatter. The seeds just fall off the moment they're ripe. Early farmers kept the seeds from the mutant plants where the seeds stayed on, making harvesting possible. And of course, we bred them to taste better and be less toxic. But here's the thing. Domestication was really just Act 1. Once these new crops were established, they started to travel with people as they migrated. And that kicked off a whole new chapter in their evolutionary story. You can actually break this whole journey down into 4 main stages. We've talked about stage 1, that initial domestication. That was followed by improvement, just making things better and better, like getting more grain per plant. Then came diversification, which is where things get really wild. And that leads all the way up to today's modern scientific breeding. This diversification phase is so cool. As these newly domesticated plants traveled out of their homelands with people, they were suddenly facing brand new challenges. Completely different climates, new kinds of soil, and maybe most importantly, totally different human cultures who wanted to use them in different ways. And all that pressure to adapt, it caused an absolute explosion of variety. Just look at maize. It is the perfect example of this. It wasn't just corn anymore. Oh no, Native American cultures selected for unique forms like pod corn to use in ceremonies. Down in Peru, a variety that was perfect for popping became a local favorite. When maize finally got to Europe, Italians started selecting for their own local tastes, creating a red sweet corn. And back in the Americas, dent corn was perfected for making staples like hominy. One plant became 1,000 different things. For thousands of years, all of this change was driven by careful observation and just picking the best plants. But in the last century or so, we finally gained the tools to look under the hood and actually read the genetic blueprint that was guiding this whole process. The geneticist Hitoshi Kihara put it perfectly. He said, "The history of all organisms is inscribed in the chromosomes." And man, when we finally started to read the chromosomes of our crops, we found a surprising and really powerful evolutionary story. A huge part of that story comes down to this phenomenon with a bit of a sciencey name, polyploidy. But the concept is actually pretty simple. It's when an organism's entire set of chromosomes gets duplicated. Just imagine having 2 or 3 or even more complete copies of your entire genetic instruction manual. Now, here's the part that will blow your mind. Genomic analysis has revealed this isn't some rare accident. The evolutionary history of pretty much all flowering plants, and that includes all of our crops, is just filled with these episodes of the whole genome doubling happening over and over again through deep time. Researchers have this fantastic and very simple analogy for this complex cycle of genome doubling and then sorting itself out again. They call it the wash, rinse, repeat cycle of plant evolution. So why does this matter so much? Well, every time a genome doubled, it created this massive surplus of gene copies. It was basically a genetic sandbox for evolution to play in. This gave both natural selection and later human selection a ton of raw material to work with, allowing for new traits and all the amazing diversity we see in our crops today. And that brings us right up to the present day. That 10,000-year partnership we have with plants is now facing some of its biggest challenges ever. And we are the ones writing the next chapter of crop evolution right now. And you can see just how much our priorities have shifted. For millennia, we were selecting for things like, is it easy to harvest? Does it grow when I expect it to? Does it taste good? But today, the challenges are on a whole different scale. We need crops with climate resilience that can handle drought, that can fight off new diseases, and that can grow using less water and fertilizer. The good news is we have a powerful new toolkit to meet these challenges. Scientists are actually going back to the wild relatives of our crops, looking for those tough, resilient genes we might have bred out by accident. We're using genomic selection, where we can predict how a plant will perform just by reading its DNA. And with tools like CRISPR, we can now make incredibly precise genetic changes to build better, stronger plants faster than ever. So what this all really means is that our long story isn't over. Not by a long shot. That ancient partnership, the one that started with a farmer just saving the best seeds, has now entered this incredibly sophisticated, high-tech phase. The evolution continues. When you step back and look at the whole thing, it's an unbelievable story. A journey from the wild, chaotic diversity of nature to the orderly, high-yield fields that feed our modern world. And every single step of the way, the engine was adaptation, guided by the human hand. And that leaves us with one last big question to chew on. We have been shaping our crops for 10,000 years to meet our needs. So as we look ahead to the next 100 years, with all the incredible challenges and new technologies on the horizon, what are we going to ask of our plants next? What will the food on our plates even look like?